Tokyo Extreme Racer Drift 2, also known as Kaido Battle in Japan and Kaido Racer 2 in other regions, is a drift racing simulator that is also a sequel and is the third installment in the Kaido Battle series that takes a lot of heavy influence from Toge racing and even with movies such as Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, and is even also inspired by the iconic Initial D series in Japan. And like the previous games in the series, I have covered the first Tokyo Extreme Drift game. I'll leave a link in the description so you can also go and check it out. And the game takes many elements from the original title that focuses on Toge racing, but also primarily the main idea and focus is heavily dependent on drift racing and improving your drifting skills. The game improves upon many elements of the original game with a more diverse career mode that allows you to play as a single character, where you have to start off with buying a base car and gradually improving it by utilising upgrades and increasing your skills to take on some of the best racers throughout the region, so that you can potentially become the best racer throughout the entire area. That in itself though is no easy task, as with this being a simulation game like the first game in the series, it is also quite difficult to master and get to grips with the controls. And even at a time when PS2 racing games, although a lot of them were quite good, a lot of the control systems on racing games at that time still were not as refined as you would see in more modern games today. So it definitely took a lot of patience to get used to the control systems, as they were quite tricky and cumbersome for their time. As you progress through the campaign, you will gain access to many other different types of cars, all from different brands, with the likes of Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, among some of the most popular JDM manufacturers in existence, and that you would all be familiar with growing up in the 80s and 90s with some of the most iconic cars ever created. And with the progression system throughout the story of the game, it would put you in mind of games such as likes of the later Need for Speed entries on the PlayStation 2, such as Need for Speed Most Wanted and Need for Speed Carbon, as the progression systems in those games, especially Need for Speed Most Wanted, where you would have to compete in a number of competitive races and win them in order to gain access to race a member of what was called the Blacklist. So they were like the top tier racers. There was like 15 or 20 in total, and you had to defeat them in order to progress up the tiered ladder, so that you could then have a chance of racing against the next person on the list and so forth. So many of the elements used in Tokyo Extreme Racer Drift 2 utilises similar ideas in terms of its progression system, where when you defeat one boss on one stage, you then have the ability then to repeat the process and go through a lot of trials and features and other races, with the potential to race another boss within the next region and so forth, until you become the top racer within the area. So in order to do that, you will have to put a lot of time and effort into the game, and you will have to get used to the tricky control system in order to have an advantage to win races, because races are based off of different types of challenges, anything from like having to acquire a certain amount of points, even through time trial and time attack events where you have to complete races within a certain time frame. And at the start, when you're starting off with your base car, it's very hard to do that because your car wouldn't be as quick as you would expect. So you'll have to keep doing races and earn more points or currency to either upgrade the car that you currently have or to purchase a new car, so that you can eventually start to compete at a higher level in the game. So there's definitely a lot of elements and replayability factors that are present in the game that will definitely keep you engaged for quite some time. Upon release, however, the game did receive somewhat of a mixed reception, and it was usually due to the trickiness of the controls and the difficulty of getting used to various aspects of the game. Although, that being said, this series of games has also amassed a massive cult following among various car enthusiasts over the years, and these series of games are also the direct inspiration for other games developers in the modern day, with even smaller companies and even larger companies and indie developers to go and create their own versions of drift racing games that they would have taken much inspiration from these games. So in their own right, Even though these may not be considered to be the best racers on the PlayStation 2, they have had a massive cultural impact on the future of drift racing games in general. But one of the things to take away from this game as well, like the previous games in the series, as you can't fault it, and I myself have personally witnessed this, is that they are without a doubt some of the most beautifully looking and well presented games or racing games that you can see on the PS2. And the graphics are right up there with the heavy hitters such as likes of Gran Turismo among other racers, as the graphics are very lifelike and realistic. That's one thing you can't fault with these type of games, is that the graphics truly are incredible for the time, and sometimes it's quite hard to believe that it is running on a PS2. Although the PS2 was capable of so much, but sometimes there were certain games that just came out that you genuinely couldn't believe what you were seeing, as they looked way ahead of its time, and this is one of those games that is able to do that. But aside from that, the only negative aspect really is just the controls, as for a casual player it will be very difficult and time consuming to try and get to grips with the controls and some of the features. But if you're more of a dedicated player, which this game really does cater itself more to, as more of a hardcore racing enthusiast, they're the type of people that will definitely get the most out of this type of game. But just note that if you do want to get good at these type of drift games, you will have to put some time into it, as the controls are tricky. But when you do master it and you do get the hang of it, you will find that you will have a worthwhile experience. Even for myself personally, having spent time playing the game, I will be honest, I was terrible at it at the start. Even like the first game, it took a while to get a feel for how to drift the car and how to maintain the drift, because I was crashing all the time. Even by doing this segment of the video, this was actually one of the best runs I was able to have, and even though it's not great, I'm sure there's people out there that'll be able to do a far better job than me. But it's one of those games that at the same time is difficult, but when I found that I started to put a bit more time into it and really thought about what I was doing, you were gradually starting to get better. You could see small levels of improvements throughout play, so I think that's the one thing to take away from the game itself and the experience. It is difficult from the start and the offset, but it's just one of those games that you do genuinely have to put a bit of time into in order to really see the full potential that it has to offer. But at the same time, this game is definitely more focused towards the more hardcore enthusiasts of racing games. Those are the ones that will get the most value out of it. If you're just a casual gamer coming in to play it, it may not be for you, but it is what it is regardless. And again, this series of games, like I mentioned, has been the sole impact and inspiration for many iconic and newer games that you see today. So it is interesting to go back and see what these type of games looked like back in those days. And I would love to know your thoughts on Tokyo Extreme Racer Drift 2 for the PS2. And if you have played it yourself, are you a fan of this series of games also? And do you genuinely like drift racing games? I'd love to hear whatever stories you have of the games in this series, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more content around similar types of racing games seen on the PS2, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated of future videos. And in the meantime, you can also check out this playlist here on screen to see more racing games in action. And I will see you all in the next one.